Welcome, science friends, to Intro to the Cell Cycle. Living things have a life cycle. Living things are born, they develop and grow, and, spoilers, living things also die. Cells are not an exception to this. Cells also go through a life cycle, and we call that the cell cycle. They are created, they develop and grow, and then they die, just like all other living things. You also started as a cell. Smaller than the period at the end of a sentence. So smaller than that dot right there. That's how you began. Going from egg to baby, so the original fertilized egg has to divide and divide and divide and divide and divide and get bigger and create more and more of these cells. So you can see that in the pictures here. There's a progression from one egg cell to 2 to 4, and it keeps going and going and going until we get an embryo. So why do cells divide? Well, there's 3 main reasons. First is for reproduction. There are unicellular organisms or single-celled organisms that go through asexual reproduction, where they don't need any other organism of their species to reproduce. They do it by themselves. So that includes things like bacteria and amoebas and lots of other single-celled organisms. Cells also divide for growth. They go from fertilized egg to multicellular organism, just like we do and many other multicellular organisms. They start as a single cell, single egg cell, then it gets fertilized and it starts to go through this dividing process. And the last main reason is for repair and renewal. We need to replace the cells that die. So just like I said earlier, cells go through a life cycle just like we do. They do die, so we need to replace the ones that die, but also normal wear and tear. So when things get damaged, for instance, you fall down and you skin your knee, well, we need to repair those cells or even replace those cells that were damaged in that fall. So what is passed on to daughter cells? And we call the new cells that are produced at the end of cell division daughter cells because they're new and born. Well, we need the exact copy of genetic material, the DNA, and everything else that a cell needs to be successful. So all of those organelles like cytoplasm and ribosomes and endoplasmic reticulums and all that stuff. And they need enzymes, and they need proteins, and they need all of the stuff that makes cells successful. Now we can see here, we have a little kangaroo rat, and the cell in that picture is a real cell from a kangaroo rat, and we can see the DNA in the form of chromosomes in that cell. So in the middle, we see it's kind of in a circular shape, that's the nucleus, and it's stained orange are those chromosomes. So it's really cool. Very, very cool. So during the cell cycle, a parent cell, so the original cell, will grow and it divides to form 2 new daughter cells, so to speak. So there's the original cell, we call it the parent, and when it divides, we call the 2 new cells daughter cells. And that cycle of making new cells, growing, dividing, all of that, has 3 main stages. So the cell cycle has interphase, which is the largest portion of that pie. We have mitosis, which is the actual division part, and the cytokinesis, which is the physical separation of those cells. So here's just a quick look at interphase. We're going to talk a little bit more about interphase in a few videos, but here we can see there's the cell. There aren't too many organelles in there. There's just the nucleus, because we're mostly thinking about that DNA, that genetic material, those chromosomes. Now, chromosomes are made of DNA. They're just the really packaged, wound up, twisted DNA. We start with, that double letter, then it twists around those proteins, those histones, until it becomes chromatin. Now, the next few words are going to sound very similar, so it's important that we know the difference between them. So chromatin is what we find in the nucleus of a cell. It's not just the double helix, it's a little bit wound up, but it's kind of noodly. So that's chromatin. Those are fibers of DNA. Then that chromatin twists and winds up to form a chromatid. Now, a chromatid is that more tightly packaged DNA. Finally, when we go through the DNA replication process, we make a copy of that chromatid, and we have now 2 sister chromatids that have the same information because we just replicated that DNA. When they're replicated and they're put together into that X shape, that's called a chromosome. And those chromosomes are the X shape in the middle of it, those two sister chromatids are attached at the centromere. Now the centromere is just that little button, so to speak, that holds together that X shape or those two sister chromatids. That was Intro to the Cell Cycle. I hope it helped.